No Formula 1 championship is complete without a good car design controversy. This time, it is something that the FIA threatened to crack down on early in the season. Something had finally made them think that teams might be abusing the rules though, and a new technical directive has been issued to address it. Want to know why Toto Wolff is outraged at Red Bull and Ferrari again? Then stick around for the rest of the video. This story begins all the way back in February, before we'd even had the pre-season testing in Spain. F1's all-new rules era this season has led to a shift to a more ground effect concept, with much more of a car's downforce generated by airflow running underneath the floor. The new cars have large Venturi tunnels on the underside to help direct the air, and the design changes have prompted a rethink about finding fresh performance gains. As teams have better understood this new generation of cars, they've quickly realized that there are great benefits to be gained by maximizing the underfloor flow. Back then, teams realized that while super stiff suspension was going to be the way to go when trying to get the most out of the underfloor, having a floor that's a little bit flexible could be a huge advantage. Such flexing could help seal the airflow better under the car, which would produce much more of the ground effect phenomenon to boost downforce. Nicholas Tobias, the FIA's head of single-seater matters, said, "Regarding flexing the diffuser or the floor edges to go downwards, we will be always keeping an eye on any flexibility that takes place, and we will be imposing, when necessary, tests to reduce such effects and so on. With the new regulation, it is inevitable that there may be some areas which were not properly predicted in terms of flexibility, and that may have to be enhanced as we go along. We will not hesitate to do that. The rules permit us to intervene if we find that some abuse is taking place in certain areas." What Nicholas means by the FIA being allowed to intervene is that they can introduce new tests to check for flexing. While the regulations say that flexible floors aren't allowed, teams will find ways to make flexible floors that can circumnavigate the FIA's tests against it. The rules, specifically Article 3.8 of the technical regulations, dictate that all components influencing a car's aerodynamic performance, which the floor does in the new formula of car, must be rigidly secured to the entirely sprung part of the car and remain immobile in relation to the sprung part of the car. In other words, movable or flexible aerodynamic devices are not allowed, save for the DRS, because in theory they can offer a performance gain. However, the FIA reserves the right to introduce further load or deflection tests on any part of the bodywork which appears to be, or is suspected of, moving whilst the car is in motion. FIA Managing Director of Motorsports Ross Brawn reckoned that it was unlikely teams would get away with such tricks, as rivals would be closely observing any strange bodywork flexing, as happened with the rear wings in 2021. "I think the issue of aero-elasticity is something which we can't avoid in F1, he explained. It has been there for a very long time, when engineers started to appreciate the performance gains that could come from building in flexibility to various parts of the cars. It goes back donkey's years. The moment there's an issue, they start to raise their flags, so the FIA will very quickly know about any areas of concern, and I'm sure can deal with it, and have the capacity to deal with it very quickly overnight." Well, apparently one team has raised their flags and questioned the legality of some of the team's flaws. The FIA has come under fire recently for their activism in the sport. Many think they're being heavy-handed with the rules and regulations to prove they still have a place and power in F1. Whether this recent rule clarification is just activism or if there is any substance to it is unknown, but apparently it's Mercedes who have highlighted the fact there might be some flexing in Red Bull and Ferrari's floor to the FIA. It probably shouldn't be a surprise at this point, as the feud between the championship leaders Ferrari and Red Bull against the Silver Arrows has been ongoing for a few races now. The current regulations say that a maximum deflection of 2mm at the two middle plank holes and no more than 2mm at its rearmost hole in a bid to ensure that the floor is stiff enough. However, at a recent meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee before the race at Silverstone, there were claims some teams have managed to cleverly flex the floors by as much as 6mm in total, which would allow them to run with a higher rake and much closer to the ground for increased performance without the risk of suffering the ill effects of ground strikes. I believe that some teams have been stretching that maybe too much, and that's going to change before Paul Ricard, said Toto Wolff. He did say that the FIA's clarification came as a surprise, as he believed the regulations regarding floors had been unambiguous. Nobody had an idea until the FIA brought it up in the last Technical Advisory Committee, which was to a great surprise of all the teams, because what's in the regulation and what the intent of the regulations is pretty clear, he said. I mean, there is no argument why that could deflect more than what's in the regs, so it's a bit of a surprise to say the least. More of a shocker. Mercedes have been accused of acting up over the porpoising problem, and this might be another instance of that. Unconfirmed reports are saying that it is Mercedes who highlighted the problem to the FIA. If that is true, then it wouldn't have been that much of a shock to Toto when it came up in the meeting. But what is it that the new technical directive says, and how will the FIA be monitoring it for anyone breaking the rules? Well, in response to the accusations of flexi floors being used, the FIA responded by adding to its technical directive aimed at reducing the effects of porpoising by notifying teams of a planned change to the rules. In the draft technical directive issued at the British Grand Prix by the FIA's single-seater technical director, Nicolas Tobias, and which comes into force in France, the FIA has announced a tightening up to the rules regarding floor stiffness. The 2mm tolerance will be rigorously enforced, and the stiffness around the floor hole must now be uniform for a radial distance of 15mm outside the periphery, with the variance not exceeding 10% either way. The FIA added, competitors will be required to demonstrate compliance with these provisions by way of a detailed inspection of both the CAD and the physical installation, as well as finite element analysis. Previously, the rules only specified no deflection greater than 2mm at two specific positions at the leading edge of the plank and slightly further back. There were no measurements taken at the rear around where the driver sits, so some teams are believed to have engineered the mounting of the plank and skid block in a way that gives a degree of cushioning. The skids are believed to be flexing more than 2mm and therefore can be used more aggressively without wearing away. If all of this is true, and some of the teams have been abusing this, then by July 24th, the date of the French Grand Prix, we might see a few cars gain some weight as teams stiffen their floors in anticipation of the new tests. This new technical directive also includes information on how the FIA will be measuring porpoising and punishing teams who do not limit it. It was first sent to the teams just before the Canadian Grand Prix but was met with widespread resistance from a lot of team principals. McLaren team principal Andreas Seidel said he was pleased with the steps the FIA had taken since Canada, where the original technical directive provoked controversy. What I was very pleased with the last 2 weeks, after all the emotions in the Montreal paddock, is that we actually had a good process in place. The last 2 weeks, led by the FIA, we had a technical advisory committee where the experts came together and actually discussed the way forward under the clear leadership of the FIA. What was important, they made it clear that on the grounds of safety, they will implement changes and they will implement a technical directive. I was very happy that each team actually could contribute and still can contribute to this technical directive that comes into place from France onwards. In parallel, also regarding the direction for next year, that's the right process. That's what I would like to see as well, how Formula 1 works, and I'm pretty happy with that. While the McLaren boss might be happy with how the FIA are handling things, those who are thought to now need to make changes won't be. Red Bull and Ferrari are both thought to be the offenders who have been abusing this loophole in the rules. It probably hasn't been giving them tenths of a second of lap time, but it will definitely be helping if they really can run their car lower to the ground by working around the FIA's tests. Horner has been very vocal about the FIA having control over how the teams set up their cars and didn't like how the original technical directive was implemented. At Silverstone, he still didn't sound happy about what was being done. He called it a dangerous avenue to go down. It's certainly not a precedent that we want to go down, otherwise setups will be being dictated by FIA directives, said Horner. We would love to hear your views on this. If the things the teams are doing are endangering their drivers, should the FIA be able to tell a team they have to change their setup? Or do you agree with Horner that the FIA telling teams to change their setups is a dangerous precedent? Maybe the FIA should issue grid penalties or time penalties instead. Whatever your thoughts, let us know down below. And if you want to see more about what's going on in F1, click the video showing on your screen right now.